and there'll be a record of this afterwards in case you want to check something out. So this is getting work done like never before. Really going to focus in on using virtual reality as a productivity platform. Looks like we got a couple more people coming in here as well, and I'm sure they'll keep jumping in, but hopefully you guys will start using the chat a little bit as we go through it. So just as a quick little background on me, this is me up here on the top. I'm just a background on me that's probably important today. I'm a tech guy. I've started multiple businesses and a productivity guy at the end of the day. You know, I started using a tablet that I could write on back in like 2004 before there was even like iPhones and iPads and all that stuff anymore. Hey, welcome, Chris. We're glad you're here. This little device down here is a haptic device. I did some research at that at the University of North Carolina back in 2008. Sort of a haptic feedback for a virtual reality realm. I'm not sure if any of you guys had ever used this. This is the Novant Falcon before. I did my first virtual reality work at the University of North Carolina as well, and that was back in 2008 or so. But now I primarily work with the Oculus at vSpatial, and I'm super excited to be there and talk a little bit about VR today and its impact on productivity. So just as a reminder, this is meant to be interactive. I said this already, but these always are a lot better. I've got my chat window open, and if you have questions, I do want you to click on that little chat button there as we're going along, and I'll ask for your feedback too. And you know, vSpatial folks, feel free to jump in there as well. Any thoughts or questions you guys have? You know, this is not meant to be a one-way platform, and you know, that's sort of one of the beautiful things about virtual reality is that it will, you know, these webinars will become much more interactive down the line, and I'm really excited about that as well as we move along. So just so I make sure you guys are all still awake, why don't you just type something in the chat window, anything, you know, say, hey, where you're at, where you're from, anything like that, just so that I know we're there. I see we got Chris in there, and Anais and Tim, and a couple of others have responded, but I know we got a lot more people that are in here that haven't said anything in the chat window yet. So please make sure you're using that. As a motivation, I am going to pick somebody. Hey, Corey can hear us. Excellent. I'm going to pick somebody at the end of this who contributes the most. That's a non-vSpatial employee, and I'll send you $10. George from BYU. Welcome, George. We're glad you're here today. I'll send you an Amazon gift card afterwards if you guys are the one who contributes the most. All right, Corey. There we go. So Corey's off to a good start. He's already got a couple in there. Dominique from New York Life. Welcome, Dominique. We're glad you're here today. Know that some more people keep coming in here, so we'll keep an eye out for them as we keep moving along this. Okay, so let me kind of give you just a high level. It's not going to all be words like this. This is the only one that has a bunch of words on it, so don't get too worried about this. But I'm going to, first off, I thought it's important that we talk a little bit about computers and where we came from and where we are now as far as productivity goes. Many of us spend all day on the computer. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what makes us productive on computers, because this is really about productivity in VR, and we need a background to that. We're going to talk about AR, augmented reality, versus virtual reality and the difference between the two for those who would do that. Current devices, we'll talk about some devices that are out there for those who don't have a lot of experience with augmented reality or virtual reality yet. And then we're going to dive into VR opportunities for increased productivity, which I hopefully is why you're here today. Some of the apps that exist that you can use now. And then a little bit about vSpatial as well at the end, because we really are trying to redefine productivity in a computer space here. So let's go ahead and dive in with a little bit of the history of computers and productivity, okay? So first off, 1981. This is what we had with computers, sort of the first ones there. Any of you guys remember these 5.5-inch floppies? I had one of these, and we had to run our games. Any games that we had to put in these little floppies and run that. So that's what it was in 1981. And then if you fast forward to 2017, they pretty much look about the same. We have a monitor, we have a keyboard, we have a monitor, we have a keyboard, we have a mouse. It really hasn't changed too much since 1981. And I think that's kind of telling too, because you think about you know, technology and how much it's changed, but the way that we interact with computers really hasn't changed that much. We still kind of have monitors and keyboards, and nothing's really changed underneath that end of things. And that's kind of a shame to think about it, honestly. So let me just make sure the things all set up there. Okay, welcome to those that continue to join in. Please open up the chat and, you know, join in along with us. No mouse in 1981. Yes, you're right. No hard drive either. That's a good point, George. No mouse. We did get a mouse, and so we made a little bit of progress, but that wasn't, you know, the mouse came around. Does anyone know when, like late 80s, early 90s, we got mice? And, you know, since then, it's been pretty much the same as far as the technology goes and inputs. So what kind of impact has that had for us? Well, it's been great in a lot of ways, but it's also kind of changed things a bit. So 1981, a lot of desks looked like this, and nowadays we have all this stuff in our computers, right? We don't have books around everywhere and papers, although, I mean, in theory, obviously some of us do. The UI is, yeah, Chris, that is really the only difference. But a lot of that has put us into this computer realm. And so we come to work and we stare at these screens all day long. We don't even turn around anymore to get books or papers. We sit here all day, and it's led to all sorts of, you know, physical problems with carpal tunnel and other things, sitting all day long and not moving around at all. But in a lot of ways, though, it's also introduced a whole new set of problems for when it comes to productivity. So a lot of us nowadays, this is some of the problems that we run into, right? We lose stuff, right? Computers crash and we lost all of our reports. At least before, we had, you know, some sort of way to find them all, right? We had this area here and they are all around. We could dig around for them, but now often we lose that. We spend all day, we don't spend all day, but there's a lot of distractions now. We've got games on side of these computers. I love this one. Been doing nothing and playing solitaire at work, and your boss tells you he needs to see you in the office. Anyone had a colleague like that? I won't ask you to say if any of you were like that. Looks like you're working, but you're really on Facebook, right? Thinking as far as productivity goes, these have a huge impact on productivity. There's been some studies done that something like 80 to 90% of all users spend some time every day not doing work-related work at work, you know, gaming or Facebooking or social media. We also then end up losing files, right? We can't find the files anymore. These files get missing everywhere, and it becomes very difficult because all we have is this little window into this digital space, and we have to, you know, we come up with folder systems and a lot of stuff to be able to find our way around. Well, that's been some of sort of the problems that we have going on right now. So let's jump a little bit into what makes us productive. Okay, so number one, I think one of the biggest factors for being productive is the user's comfort level with the devices, right? How fast somebody can type on a keyboard has a tremendous impact on their productivity. How well they understand the mouse or where things are at or how organized they are in this digital world really plays a huge, has a huge impact on their ability to be productive in virtual space. And you end up with stuff like this. Dear help desk, my computer keeps telling me I have an invalid username or password, and now my keyboard does not work. That kind of happens on that. So I think that this is one of the most important factors for the productivity on a device. You know, I definitely am more productive as my speed and skill goes up, but there's many people who can't type very quickly, and they're very limited to how fast they can actually do work on computers. Typing speed, yeah, Chris mentioned typing speed used to be a real barrier to entry even when working with computers. Yep, absolutely. Typing speed, even before computers. Good point on that. So dual monitors is the second one I wanted to bring up here. There's some studies done at University of Utah studies that basically said that having a second monitor increased your productivity by 20 to 30%. What that basically translates to is an hour and a half of extra work that you could do every day, or an hour and a half of productivity more that you can do every day just by having a second monitor. So, you know, I love this little meme over here, how I feel with one monitor versus dual monitors. And I love Iron Man. We've used it in some of our marketing and stuff like that. But how many of you actually feel like that as well, having multiple monitors and everything that goes with that you enjoy and find yourself more productive with multiple? Corey said for sure. Yeah. Oh, expensive. It's expensive to have multiple monitors for startups or small companies. Absolutely, Corey. That's a great point that I think is really important. Dominique can't even work without a second one. I'm like you, Dominique. I have to have multiple spaces to organize stuff because so much is going on with that. It definitely helps a lot with the productivity. So here's a question for you guys to consider. So if 2 monitors are good, what about 5? 5 is better, right? What do you guys think? Got some good discussion going on. Nice. No. Yes, for our flight sim. Hey, there we go, Chris. See, there's a good point there. You know, here's another one, sort of these command center. Maybe is the answer. You know, Dominique and Chris, I think you guys are all kind of thinking like I am. It really just kind of depends on what it is that you're doing and what's kind of going on. Now, a lot of times, though, you have to go back and you have to think about the way we use multiple monitors. If your third and fourth monitor has Facebook open and Twitter, then it might be more of a distraction than anything else. But if flight simulation, if you are like, you know, one of my favorite places I ever went was inside of the command center for a train company, and they have like monitors out the wazoo. Every person has a command center like this, but they're tracking all these safety protocols and things that are going on, and for them it allows them to see a lot of information. It just kind of depends. I was just checking out the chat there. Depends on your job and what it is that you do. I think that if what you do requires that you're referencing a lot of information to write or to work on something, then multiple monitors can really increase your productivity even more. But it just kind of depends. And, you know, you can kind of already see where we're going with VR and multiple monitors and some of the stuff we're doing with vSpatial along these lines. It just kind of depends. 2 is good. 5 is better if you really have a need for that, not if you're just opening up Facebook and chat and Twitter and all your other windows. And then it kind of leads to this last one. Kind of the third point that I think is important when thinking about productivity in computers is multitasking. Right? So often, many of us, one of the major contentions in the computer world and any sort of productivity world is the discussion about how much can we focus in on at one time. So many of us believe that we can do more, and I actually am one of those. I'm one of those that fall in that camp where I think that I can multitask, but the research is pretty clear that our minds can really only focus in on one thing at a time. And so multiple monitors can distract us if we aren't able to focus in on exactly what it is that we need to do. Chris brought out a good point in the chat there. You used to spend $2,000 for a 21-inch CRT. That's crazy. You know, you think about those CRTs, those are those heavy ones, those old, heavy, big ones, not the flat screens like we have nowadays. And he brings up a good point. It'd be much easier if we could just reach out. So just these kind of 3 points I think are important to kind of think about, right? You know, that we really need to be able to focus in on one thing at a time, and virtual reality is kind of great for that and can be bad for that. We need to be having many monitors around us can be great. There's an opportunity here for productivity, and dual monitors as a starting point is great, and the ability to work with devices, right? Just the ability to work within those devices really makes a big difference on that. And these are kind of 3 things that we're thinking about a lot at vSpatial. How can we make it easier for users to work with the devices? How can we make it so they can see all the data that they need, no matter where it is they're at? How can we help so they can focus as well? Those are all things that are important. I believe we're overdue for an evolution in computing and productivity, right? It's time for us to get away from those old school computers, the same thing, these keyboards and mice that we work within, and move to a virtual reality realm where we're moving and we're interacting with the data all around us. So let's talk a little bit about virtual reality. So what are these virtual reality, augmented reality things? Before we get into that, for those that are in here, can you guys tell me about your background with VR? How many of you are new to it? How many of you have a virtual reality device? And if so, what type of device do you have? Before we get into that, it's good to kind of know our audience here, and you guys can kind of add to it if you're working with it. I of course, have an Oculus device. I have a Galaxy Gear. I've started with VR a while ago, and yeah, I messed with it. I played Pokemon Go. So new to it, just purchased a Samsung Gear. Excellent, Corey. It's a great start to get into that, and we'll talk about the Samsung Gear here. You have a Vive. Perfect. Business applications. Dominique, I'm really interested to see what kind of stuff you're doing here. Hopefully you can share a little bit of what you've been finding in there as well. Chris has a Samsung Gear, wants an Oculus, but you need to upgrade your computer. That's one of the big hurdles there, isn't it, Chris? George is new to it. Corey, the kids love it. Have an Oculus, want to experiment with. Justin has, you have access to them all. You have a HoloLens as well, Justin. Excellent. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. Those are expensive little suckers. That's the key. Enough screens to see all information. Viewer24, I love your name, by the way. I love that. I'm glad you're here. Hiram. Oh, hey, Hiram. Glad you're here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about virtual reality and AR. For those who are new to it and want a kind of understanding of it, so virtual reality versus augmented reality. We have a couple of links here, and these are great articles, and one of my colleagues, Emily, is going to post those. She just posted in the chat for you if you want to go look at these pages. These are great links to check out just to learn a little bit more if you're looking to get started and have an idea about the difference between stuff and these things we're talking about. So The way that I like to describe it for those that are new to this, virtual reality is basically immersive, meaning that you put this on and it feels like you are in a new space, 360 degrees, up, down, left, right, behind you. Anywhere you look, it feels like you're in a completely different spot. Augmented reality basically lets you overlay digital objects on top of virtual space. Okay, and which one is good for you is really going to depend on what you want. Now, augmented reality, I do a lot more with virtual reality, but augmented reality has a lot of business applications, and a lot of folks are doing stuff in the augmented reality realm. We're going to talk first about augmented reality versus virtual. Oh, here's just another little sign. Which one is good for you? Virtual reality, again, kind of the idea that it's all around you. Augmented reality, like Apple's coming out with one we'll talk about in a minute, where with their AR kit, where you can take your phone and look at stuff with a camera, and it will automatically put a digital object on top of that space. Okay, so another good link there from Emily if you're looking for a little bit more stuff that I think is really good for introducing it. So on the augmented reality area, just to talk about, here's just some stats. This is the stats I'm sharing are from 2016, and Emily's sharing the link inside of here as well. But AR, augmented reality, often has a visor where you're looking, like we mentioned before here, where you're looking at this through this space, and you can see a digital object on top of that. So in this case, Magic Leap is one of the big ones in this area, 4.5 billion. Expected number of users expected to grow by 35% over the next 5 years. Okay, so big growth here. They're estimating around 500 million headsets by 2020. This was in 2016 before Apple announced their stuff, and Apple's going to, I think, have a big impact in the AR world. Lots of people. Pokemon Go is a big game that uses augmented reality that many people have heard of, and it's sort of a good way to introduce it because you take your phone and you look in an area and you see digital objects. Lots of people used it, especially last year. It's kind of waned a little bit, but it's still pretty influential. Some of the big, well, I already mentioned this, Pokemon Go, AR Kit. Yeah, we can share that link in the chat if you want to read more on that. Some of the big players in this arena, of course, Microsoft and the HoloLens, and Meta is another one, and their product called Meta. So these two devices, the HoloLens is a standalone device. What that means is you can put it on your head and you don't have to have a computer to be attached to it. It's kind of limited in its view right now, meaning that you can only see in a small area in front of you. So you don't see like on the side of you or in back of you. It's not immersive. It just kind of puts digital objects in front of you right now. But it's really a pretty neat object. Meta is much cheaper. It's around $1,000 right now, but you can see this cord here. It connects to a computer. So it does something similar to Microsoft, but it has a wider screen that you can see within. Both of these right now are really only focused on developers and not necessarily consumers. They're trying to build up a large base of applications right now so that when they release it to consumers, it will be cheaper, as well as, you can look at this $3,000 price point here. It'll be cheaper as well as have some applications. Now, who was it before? Dominique has access to one of these. Dominique, have you done any stuff with these already? Do you have anything to add to sort of the augmented reality stuff before I jump into virtual reality? Or does anyone have any questions about augmented reality? You can put those in the chat there if you guys have any questions there. All right. Seems like, are you guys still alive? You guys awake? Maybe you guys all fell asleep, or you're on Facebook now. No access. Okay. Everyone's with me. More applications in the industry. It really just kind of depends on that. So we are really focused more on the virtual reality realm first. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So virtual reality is more immersive, right? Here's some more numbers. You guys can look over this. There's huge increases in it. The way that I've heard it described is virtual reality is about a year ahead of augmented reality. There's a lot of consumer spaces out there, a lot of people using consumer applications. We have cheaper devices that people can get, like the Gear. The Galaxy Gear makes it so much easier to get on there, or the Samsung Gear. Sorry, I keep calling Galaxy. Samsung Gear allows you to get on cheaper, or even with the cardboard. So, a lot more people are using this, a lot of money in it. A lot of people see this. Only 4% of respondents between 14 and 19 said they're not interested in virtual reality at all. So there's a lot of interest. Basically, that's saying that 96% say they are interested in it, so there's a lot of people that are thinking about this and are interested in it and have heard of it a little bit. So large user base is really the point behind all that stuff there. A couple of the devices just to talk about: Samsung Gear VR. ultralight design. These are about $100. They now have touchpad. Oh, they had touchpad up here. Now we have a new one that has actually a pointer. I don't have this in this one here, but you know, these are cheap entry points. They require a cell phone to get in, but you don't necessarily get a full 300 and well, you get 360-degree view, but you can't move within the space. You really just can point within the space. Google Cardboard, obviously very cheap. It's a cardboard. You hook up a phone to it, and it lets you. There's a lot of content that lets people see 360-degree images. It's used for video mostly right now, just to let people have the experience of virtual reality. So that's one of the benefits of virtual reality, is that the price point to get in is so much cheaper for so many people, and so the adoption is going to be cheaper, at least initially, than AR, although a lot of people have phone devices too. Chris talked about, you know, the pointer works surprisingly well, doesn't focus unless you hold away from your face. Yeah, the new gear, I actually had a chance to test that out recently as well. That's what Chris is talking about, and it is pretty good. You know, you can point around, and you just can't necessarily move forward and backwards and around things. It's more of a pointer, but it does work pretty nice, and I think there's some benefit to that and some opportunities there. Some of the more common, I'll call these more the professional versions of virtual reality, is the Oculus. Facebook bought Oculus, and they're really cheap right now, $399. You can get a headset and 2 of these little controllers underneath there. And the Vive right here is around $800. This one is used for a lot of gaming. Now, gaming is definitely pushing this industry. For those that are new to this and wanting to learn about it, by far, I don't even know how much, 90%, maybe even 95, 97% of all the applications are gaming related. That's probably high. Let's say 90% is probably that. Then we have like media and lots of educational stuff too. But these are sort of the 2 big players inside of there. Oculus is owned by Facebook, and the same code base is used for the Oculus. It's also used for the Gear as well, which is pretty good for developers. But this is a different code base for Vive too. Okay, so these are sort of the big ones. A lot of games, a lot of the pictures you've seen online of people, or the fails of people in virtual reality, come from these devices. Just to briefly talk about input devices, we already mentioned the pointer like the Gear VR. These are some of the controllers that go along with the Oculus and the Vive. This one over here is actually a foot controller called the 3D Rudder, I think is what it's called, that they're building to be able to allow you to move within space. So you have a little bit more control. Now, these controllers, I think, are important in virtual reality, and especially as we think about productivity. We really need to, this needs to be this becomes the point that we need to overcome, right? Some way to be able to easily input like we can with a keyboard and mouse right now. And that's not quite there. Yeah, so Emily's chatting with me as well. So yeah, they're not quite there yet though with input devices. Like if you get into any of the business applications, which we'll talk about in a minute here, a lot of times there's a virtual keyboard, and you'll use these pointers to point at a keyboard and click with it, which of course means that you only have one input device as opposed to 10 fingers, right? You have 10 fingers versus 1 finger. It's like typing with 1 finger all the time. Now, Corey asked a question about talk to text. Now, that is definitely something that's coming along. A couple of applications now have that. I know on the Oculus, the Enterprise, the Star Trek one, has a talk to text, and that I think is going to become more and more important in virtual reality. Some people use it, not many do yet, but we need to definitely get more of that in there. Anyone using talk to text? Those that are maybe working and trying to be productive in VR already? I'd be interested to see if any of you are doing that as well. But I think that's something that we're going to continue to see more stuff on. Every single day we see new devices. I mentioned here, so here's talks to text. The future input devices, here's a picture of some gloves, right, where you get a lot more input devices and areas. And here's a headset that's got a brain thing where you actually think it, right? See this little integration here. Talk to text, like Corey mentioned. Artificial intelligence is going to play a role too, integration with all that stuff. I think all of these are going to continue to push the limits of VR. Where it stands right now, this is kind of what you have, right? We have pointing devices, which are good. The nice thing about sort of these, I forgot to mention this, is that you have a 360-degree area, right, that you can move within. So like a spatial area. So instead of pointing, you can actually move forward and move backwards and look at objects in virtual reality a lot clearer than, in a lot more depth than you could in just one of these cheaper devices like this where you can just point. So anyways, I'm excited about the future of this. There's people doing all sorts of research. Every day I swear I hear about a new one. Have you guys heard of any other interesting input devices that would be good to put in here, especially if it's related to things we can do at work and business applications in here? Guess not yet. Good. All right. Well, I'd be interested to hear if you guys think of any others. Every day, I mean, if you follow our vSpatial VR on Twitter, we're posting about stuff as we find it because we think that this is all important, right? Especially to push the limits of productivity, to change the way that we interact with virtual reality. So let's talk a little bit now about productivity here. Okay, how can we be productive in virtual space? Okay, so opportunities for increased productivity. Number one, we've already kind of touched on this, and some of we've been talking on there. Oh, full body haptic suit, Dominique. Yeah, I did see that once. Full body haptic suit. Those things like press back. So if you hit an object, they're used for gaming a lot right now, I think, Dominique. But you know, even if you had haptic fingers, right? You could be in a virtual area. Yep, the gloves. There's Justin's talking about that. You could feel maybe some feedback, some haptic feedback inside of it from a virtual object. That's kind of some of the research I did at UNC, and I think that's really within there too. So getting to back to productivity. Unlimited screen, unlimited space, right? Even with augmented reality, you have obviously a space in front of you and unlimited space if you move around. That's another benefit of augmented reality. You can move a lot. There's no limit to screens and space. So if you need another screen, you can open another screen. It won't cost you to get more. You don't have the monitor costs. We actually did a test the other day in our office, and we set up a VR device with a computer and no monitor at all. And we just set it so it automatically, as soon as it starts up, you can put on your headset, and you don't have a monitor or any of that cost that goes with it, but you can have as many virtual monitors as you want for every application. Okay, so lots of opportunities there as far as productivity goes in screens. Okay, moving on. So immersing yourself in productivity. So we all know we work better in our spaces, right? One of the things that I love is I have different spaces that I work at in my house. Now I have to set up, I have like 5 different spaces. I have a tread desk, I have my sitting desk, I have a place outside that I can sit and work, but all these things require cost for me to set up a desk or to set up a chair or to set up multiple monitors, because I often, like if I'm outside, I lose my multiple monitors and then I'm not as productive as I could. Well, with virtual reality, you can have your own space and then you can set it up the way that you want, and it will always be like that. And then ideally, what we want is to be able to take that with us, right? That's what we're moving towards with our virtual reality and these standalone headsets and cell phones and everything like that. That's what we're trying to get to, where we can really be immersed in it in our own spaces. And then also to have it all around us and engage with it in a way that we couldn't do before. I like to think about this one as sort of my Tony Stark one, right? This is the example we all, maybe we're not all familiar with, but many of us are familiar with Iron Man and the way that he interacted with the digital objects. Obviously, he didn't have an Oculus on, but that's a good example of the way that I see it working in virtual reality. We can see our objects, especially 3D objects or graphing or anything like that. We can reimagine it in a 3D environment instead of this 2D environment that we're at right now. And I'm really excited about that, you know, where that's coming down the line. There's not a lot that does that now, but, you know, like in the medical field, there's some people that are doing things with scans, and there's certainly some. I saw one today where someone digitized a screen, an image, and then it made a 3D model of it instantly inside a space. So these are kind of the 3 big areas that I think are initially stuff that are opportunities in virtual reality. You have unlimited space around you, you can immerse yourself in it, and you can engage with it with your hands and other devices as more of that comes along. So you aren't stuck on a keyboard getting carpal tunnel with a mouse or in one place. One of the things I love as I've done more and more of this in virtual reality is that I'm looking all around. I love to stand when I work anyways, and then I'm standing and moving and looking and moving my head, and I'm not sedentary sitting all day long in this one spot looking at this one screen and never moving my head. So anyways, those are kind of big three things there. Any other thoughts that you guys have? What other virtual reality opportunities are there that you guys have seen for those that are already in this world, or are you guys wondering about? What kind of possibilities do you see in your industries? I'll take just a second and we'll look for some comments there. Teleportation. I love that, Dominic. What do you mean by that? Why don't you explain a little bit more on that? to kind of get your brains going a little bit too, I like to think about industries, like think about education. There's so much in education that, can really change the way we do that. Education hasn't changed much either since the early, 1800s. We have a teacher who stands in front of people and lectures, and this allows so much more interaction and personalized interaction as well. When taking time with coworker, but yeah, exactly. Visit with coworker. Dominique, okay, that's a good one. Teleportation, meaning that you can connect with people instantly. And there's one of the things that I love about it, we're going to talk about this in our next webinar about collaboration more, is the feeling of presence, right? When you're in a virtual space, it really feels like you're together, and you can point at objects and interact with them so much better than we can do on webinars like this. I can't wait until we have ours out there and we can meet inside of virtual reality and we can do this webinar, because it's going to be so much more interactive, right? Chris asks, interested virtual space for is real for both work and for play. Second life but open, perhaps without cryptocurrency. So I'm not sure I totally understand that one there, but I think that we definitely can. There's definitely work to be done in VR as well as fun to be had inside of it. And I think there's a good intersection. We often talk about the millennial generation. We love millennials. Most of our team is millennials, and there's so much that they want to have fun while we work, and this makes it so much more fun. We actually wrote an article recently on our site about that and how much more interactive it is to be on a computer and in virtual reality versus a regular one. When cloud-based do that, limitations of time and space. Much prefer to be there in VR rather than in time. Tourism, that's a great one. Yeah, tourism is another good one that people are starting to do. The home industry, a lot of people are like doing home tours. When you're building a home, I saw an app the other day where you can completely feel like you're in your new house before it even gets built out to see what it's like. Gaming industry is a huge one. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Corey mentioned disabled folks. I think that that's an interesting one too, because there's a lot of work being done for elderly and disabled where they can get in virtual space and feel like they are everywhere and experience things that they couldn't experience anyway. So John Sally wants his virtual office to be in Wrigley Field. That's perfect. I want mine to be in the top of a mountain, right? That's my area. I want to be sitting on top of a mountain with monitors all around me and being able to interact with my data. So let's talk just a little bit about what applications exist already. Of course, we have our Tony Stark guy. Current apps on the market that some people are using to integrate to try and be productive, because this is an area that not a lot's being done yet. So Big Screen is one of the big players. It is available on both Oculus and Vive, and Big Screen basically connects to your computer and lets you have monitors to your computer. It's free to use. Most people use it for gaming and getting together. There's multiple people in there, and you can point and do some other neat stuff inside of it, but it's limited by the actual physical monitors that you have connected up. So there's no virtual monitors. You can only have 2 monitors showing up if you actually have physical monitors to go with it. Deskverse, very similar as well to Big Screen. It costs $9.99. It allows you to connect to your screen. All 3 of these, virtual desktop, that does the same thing. They all basically connect to your computer and allow you to see your screen and interact with it with a pointer. They might have a keyboard, like Big Screen has a keyboard that you can connect with. All of these kind of have keyboards and ways to go inside of that. But it just real quick. There we go. New MJ just came in. MJ, welcome. We're glad you're here. Just muted you, but you can use the chat. We're kind of chatting through this stuff. But these are kind of 3 of the big players right now that allow you to connect to a computer, but they're just kind of bringing it into a virtual space. That's kind of what we're doing with it. Does anyone have any other applications like this that they've seen that they might use to try and be productive yet? I'm wondering if there's others out there that I don't know of. There's some other collaboration ones as well, but put them in the chat if you guys know of any others. We're always looking at that. So I want to just briefly talk about vSpatial. Obviously, that's our company here. I just want to give you guys an introduction. This is not currently available. It will be we're shooting for about 3 weeks. And to the middle of this month, this application will be available. But we're using it internally now, and I love it. It's really awesome with what you can do with it. So the idea behind it is that this is a virtual reality workspace, right? A space where you can set up and work, and you get some of those benefits we talked about before. Number one, Unlimited screens. That's what we're moving towards. Our initial one will allow for, I think, 6 different screens, but the screens are not connected to the monitors that you have. Like I mentioned before, we hooked up a computer yesterday with no monitors, and we were able to get inside of vSpatial and mess with it and do all sorts of stuff with it. You can create, the way that we do it too is we can have a desktop window, but we create windows for each application. One of the limitations of virtual reality right now is the resolution. Each window allows you to have different resolutions and more stuff with it. We're really thinking a lot about how we can actually be productive inside of that. But the screens are all around you, so you kind of got that multiple monitors, multiple applications that you can interact with and you can work with inside of it. Okay, so that's coming up, and I think that's going to be amazing, right? It's going to I love using it right now. Interacting with your files and your data on your computer. Currently, the other things that are on the market only allow you to interact just like you would with a desktop. You have a window, you click on the file folder, you open up the file folder, and you move through it. Well, we're building in an actual native integration with the file system on your computer. It's not going to look like this. It's changed since this screenshot, but we have an interaction that lets you basically interact in virtual reality, search through your computer, have its own native interface, and take advantage of the virtual area around you instead of actually being limited to a screen that you're working on. We're trying to move outside of the screen. That's what we're moving towards here, a little bit at a time as the technology and the functionality exists for it. So taking advantage of that, visualizing the data in ways that weren't possible. And then, I didn't put this on here. There's a couple of other neat features, but we have like a focus mode that allows you to get in and look at one item, zoom in, zoom out, move all around, move items around inside of it. You really get to interact with your area and, of course, work from anywhere. That's sort of the beauty of it. Here's a beautiful screenshot of one of our scenes inside of there, 360-degree beach view. Some of those other ones there. Those are not shots from live views, Chris. There's no avatars that you'll see in this initial release of this. Those are just putting in there so you can actually see that. So that's a good question underneath that. But basically, you can choose your environment, work from anywhere in the world, keep kind of a back end of that. That's about all we want to preview right now. I think the best thing for you guys to do is just to make sure you're following us on Twitter or go to our site, vSpatial, and sign up there to be notified when we launch. Then you guys can go download it. But it is going to be free. This initial version, just so you know, is going to be free of that. That's from San Diego, Emily. Oh, that's good. There you go. That 360 degrees from San Diego. I'm not sure who took that. I guess one of our own people took that underneath there. But if you aren't following us already on Twitter, please go and follow us underneath there and go to our website, and you can kind of you can sign up there to be notified when we launch this. And as I said, in about, I don't know, towards the end of this month is when we'll be launching that. Yeah, Dominique, it's going to be awesome. I think it'll be fun. Perfect. Yeah, there are different options there. Emily's putting that in there. So, questions, comments. Now's the time for your questions, comments. I'll answer any ones that you have. What other things did we not talk about? What kind of thoughts do you guys have about productivity in VR? Dominique, you're working in this area. I'm curious about what kind of things you've seen and thought about as well. I'll let you guys put those underneath there. Emily, while we're waiting for any questions that come up underneath there, do you? I know she's been keeping tally there of a winner. Maybe one thing we could ask here. Oh, there we go, Chris. Chris asked a question too. If you're just getting into this, which do you recommend, the Rift versus the Vive? I shared code bases with Gear VR is a big positive. Yes. So Chris, I think that you really just need to decide what it is that you're looking to do with it. We decided to focus on the Oculus for the shared code base, and it's also much cheaper entry point. Facebook's using it, which means there's a lot of a back end on that. And I really think that it's really an interactive one, but I'm not sure if some of the other, I think we have some coders in here, maybe Sun, I don't know if he has any ideas on this about why, other reasons we did that, but I can check into that. We do have another webinar coming up in a couple of weeks. This one is going to be with our CEO, Richard Platt. He's actually one of the pioneers in the VoIP industry, and he actually built a company that sold, yep, there's a link there from Emily. He built up a company that was sold to Cisco, which became their VoIP offering in the late 90s. And he's back in working on this and running this company. Super techie guy and awesome. So I'd recommend that you click on that link there that Emily put up there, and mark yourself as coming, or go to our website and register as well so that you can get those requirements for it. Requirements for the release, our release is going to be an Oculus release only. So you need to have an Oculus device if you want to use our initial one. We are, of course, looking to expand to future devices as soon as possible. It just depends on resources and everything else that goes along with that. So the initial release, though, will be an Oculus release. Interest in VR and remote control. We sent a robot to Mars. Can we use it through VR to be there? Yes, Corey, what a cool idea. I could totally see that working, right? You could have a robot in Mars, and for that matter, that's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought of that. Like, what about just a robot, a virtual robot anyways? I remember seeing I don't know if it was a movie, I think it was actually real life, where somebody had an iPad, and then they had built a virtual, a robot, a real robot somewhere else, and they just put the iPad on that robot and moved around, and they had sort of a way to be able to fill that. But imagine hooking that up to the rudder, and you could, that little rudder device I showed you before with your feet, you can move around an area and interact and use your arms. The nice thing about these VR controllers is you can grab items, right? So if you connect that to robotics, man, that would be pretty awesome. Justin asked what we're building in Unity. We're using Unity. I'm wondering your prediction on adoption of an enterprise level. Office costs a lot of money. What are the obstacles that still remain? Dominique, that's something we think about a lot. We're betting on an adoption at enterprise level being bigger, especially with the millennial generation. You think about the millennials, and we love to work. I mean, I'm borderline millennial, but we love to work remotely. We love to have the freedom to do things differently and to change the paradigm and to interact with stuff. And especially if we can get the cost down on these virtual devices with, virtual cell phones, with standalone VR devices, then you can actually have, and if we can figure out the input, right? That's the big one there. So drone piloting, Chris, that's an awesome one. Can you imagine actually being able to pilot that around and feel, I don't know. So some of the things, Chris, if you haven't used it before, people get sick in VR too. What I found is a lot of people teleport to move because when you're moving it's so realistic, it makes you sick. If you get motion sick on like rides at Six Flags, well, this can make you sick as well. So that definitely can make a difference on that. Yeah. Chris, do you have a VR device that you've been in and tried to play some of the games and moving around in it, or tried the virtual rides? I think it definitely makes a difference. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and finish up here. Let me just give you, this is my information here. If you guys have any questions or want to email me ever, you can follow me on Twitter at Edutechie. Be sure to follow us, the company, vSpatial VR. Super important. We post on there several times every day. We're very active on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn as well. Please just follow us and pass on the word. As we get going out there, the more people we can get that are thinking about this, the more ideas we can have to kind of push the level of productivity, and how do we get this office in there, and how do we be productive in this virtual space. I think there's a lot that goes with that. Chris, please, I'm going to put my email's right there. Please email me your email address, and I'll get you that Amazon card. Any other questions that you guys have, feel free to hang out here afterwards. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and I'll stop the recording now, and I can answer any questions afterwards, or we'll see you guys hopefully at our next VR event. So appreciate you guys being here today. Let me stop this real quick.